When Giant's Fall Silent Fleet Commander Zenth stood tall on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion, his four arms crossed behind his back as he gazed out at the stars. The massive dreadnought was the flagship of the Nexari Empire's most powerful fleet, and today marked the completion of their 73rd successful conquest. The Calarian system now belonged to the Empire, its resources flowing back to the Nexari homeworld, its population either enslaved or scattered to the winds. The Nexari had ruled the galaxy for over 2 centuries, their empire built on a simple philosophy. The strong take what they need, and the weak exist only to serve. Zenth had risen through the ranks by embodying this principle perfectly. His victories were legendary, his methods ruthless, and his loyalty to the Empire absolute. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous armor-like skin and eyes that glowed with an inner fire, he was the perfect representation of Nexari superiority. "Commander," came a voice from behind him. Zenth turned to see his communications officer, Subcommander Thexenai, approaching with a data tablet clutched in his 3-fingered hands. "We have received the survey reports from the scouting division. They have identified our next target." Zenth took the tablet and studied the information displayed on its glowing surface. The target was a small system on the outer rim of the galaxy, unremarkable in most respects except for one detail. The third planet from its star showed signs of a developing civilization. The preliminary scans indicated a species that had achieved basic spaceflight but remained confined to their own world and immediate vicinity. "Humans," Zenth read aloud, his voice carrying the metallic resonance common to the species. "Population, approximately 8 billion. Technology level, primitive. Military capability, negligible. Estimated conquest time, 12 standard hours." The commander's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. This would be another easy victory for the Empire. The humans appeared to be divided into competing nations, making them vulnerable to the Empire's divide-and-conquer tactics. Their weapons were crude, their defenses non-existent, and their knowledge of the wider galaxy apparently limited to their own solar system. "Prepare the fleet for hyperspace transit," Zenth ordered. "We move to the Sol system immediately." As the order was transmitted throughout the 500 ships of the Nexari War fleet, Zenth returned his attention to the intelligence report. The humans fascinated him in their apparent primitiveness. They had achieved nuclear technology, but seemed more interested in using it for energy production than weapons. They had developed basic space travel, but used it primarily for scientific exploration rather than military expansion. It was almost amusing how unprepared they were for what was coming. The fleet's hyperspace engines powered up with a deep thrumming that resonated through the hull of every ship. Space twisted and folded around them as they entered the space-time tunnel that would carry them across the galaxy in a matter of days. The journey to Earth would be swift, and the conquest even swifter. The IT was on the second day of travel that the first strange transmission reached them. Zenth was reviewing tactical plans when Thexenai approached him again, this time with an expression of confusion on his reptilian features. "Commander, we have received an unusual message. It appears to be directed specifically at our fleet, but the source is unknown." Zenth glowing eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The transmission came through on an encrypted frequency that should be impossible for any primitive species to access. The message is brief but disturbing." Thexenai activated a holographic display that showed the text of the message in standard galactic script. The words appeared in the air before them. "Turn back, Nexari fleet. The Sol system is protected by forces beyond your understanding. This is your only warning. The Silent Watchers are everywhere." Zenth studied the message for a long moment before dismissing it with a gesture. "Psychological warfare. The humans must have allies we were not aware of. It matters little. No force in the galaxy can stand against the combined might of the Nexari Empire." But even as he spoke with confidence, something about the message troubled him. The encryption was sophisticated, far beyond what any primitive species should be capable of, and the name Silent Watchers stirred something in his memory, though he could not place what. The fleet continued its journey, but more messages began to arrive. Each one carried the same warning. but with increasing urgency. The Silent Watchers knew details about the Nexary fleet that should have been impossible to obtain: the number of ships, their armament, even the names of specific commanders. Whoever they were, they had intelligence capabilities that rivaled the Empire's own. Commander, Fex and I reported on the third day. We have attempted to trace the source of these transmissions. The signals appear to be coming from everywhere. Multiple star systems, dead space, even from within our own fleet's formation. It's as if they have monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Zentka considered this information carefully. The Nexary Empire had the most advanced sensor technology in known space, yet they could not pinpoint the source of these messages. It suggested a level of stealth capability that was truly impressive, though still not enough to deter him from his mission. Increase our scanning intensity, he ordered. I want to know who these Silent Watchers are and how they are monitoring our movements. But do not alter our course. We will reach Earth as planned. As the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, Zentka felt a moment of satisfaction. The journey was complete, and soon another world would fall under the Empire's control. The star systems spread out before them, looking exactly as the intelligence reports had described. The inner planets were small and rocky, while the outer planets were gas giants with extensive moon systems. Earth itself was a beautiful blue-green world orbiting in a habitable zone, its surface covered with clouds and continents. The initial sensor sweeps confirmed what they already knew. Earth's orbital space contained only a handful of primitive space stations and communication satellites. The planet's surface showed the heat signatures of major population centers, but no evidence of significant military installations. The humans appeared to be just as unprepared as the intelligence reports had suggested. No defensive positions detected, reported Tactical Officer Kexvor. The orbital installations appear to be civilian in nature. We are detecting some radio transmissions from the surface, but they are using primitive communication protocols. Zentka nodded with satisfaction. The Silent Watchers had been nothing more than a bluff, an attempt to frighten them away from an easy conquest. It had failed completely. Begin the standard conquest protocol, he ordered. Move the fleet into high orbit around Earth. Prepare to transmit our surrender demands to the surface. This will be over within the hour. But as the massive Nexary fleet moved deeper into the solar system, something began to feel wrong. The silence was too complete, too perfect. For a species that had achieved spaceflight, the humans were remarkably inactive. Their few orbital installations made no attempt to flee or hide. Their radio transmissions continued as if nothing unusual was happening. It was as if they were completely unaware that 500 warships had just entered their system. Commander, Kexvor called out, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. I am detecting some unusual readings from the asteroid belt. The energy signatures are inconsistent with natural phenomena. Zentka moved to the tactical display and studied the sensor data. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was showing traces of artificial energy, but the readings were faint and scattered. It could be mining operations or scientific installations, nothing that would pose a threat to the fleet. Maintain course, he ordered. Continue monitoring those readings, but do not be deterred by them. The humans are about to learn what happens when a primitive species attracts the attention of the Nexary Empire. As the fleet entered Earth's orbital space, Zentka allowed himself a moment of anticipation. Another world was about to fall, another victory to add to his already impressive record. The Silent Watchers, whoever they were, had failed to protect their human allies. Soon, Earth would be just another conquered world in the Empire's vast domain. The trap was set, though Zentka did not yet realize it. The silence that had seemed so reassuring was actually the quiet before the storm. The humans had learned long ago that sometimes the best defense was to appear defenseless, and the Silent Watchers had taught them well. The Nexary fleet had entered the Sol system expecting to find prey, but they were about to discover that they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a primitive world. They had found hope, What lies beneath the surface? The first sign that something was wrong came when the Nexari fleet reached high orbit around Earth. Zenth-Ka stood at the command console, preparing to transmit the standard surrender demands to the planet's surface when every screen on the bridge suddenly flickered. For a moment, static filled the displays, and then a new image appeared. A human face looking directly at him through the communication array. The human was a woman with dark hair pulled back in a military style, her brown eyes calm and intelligent. She wore a uniform that Zenth-Ka did not recognize, with insignia that seemed to blend elements from multiple different species. Most disturbing of all, she was speaking in perfect Nexari standard, a language that no human should have been able to understand, let alone speak. "Greetings, Fleet Commander Zenth-Ka," she said, her voice carrying through the bridge with crystal clarity. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth Defense Network. We have been expecting you." The bridge fell silent. Zenth-Ka's forearms tensed as he stared at the impossible sight before him. The human knew his name, his rank, and was somehow communicating on secure Nexari frequencies. Behind her, he could see what appeared to be a sophisticated command center, with displays showing star charts and tactical information that suggested a level of technology far beyond what their intelligence reports had indicated. "How are you accessing our communication systems?" Zenth-Ka demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Captain Vasquez smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Commander, we have been monitoring your fleet since it left the Calarian system. We know your mission, your capabilities, and your intentions. We also know that you have been receiving warnings from the Silent Watchers for the past 3 days. Zenth-Ka felt a chill run through his chitinous hide. The Silent Watchers, the mysterious messages that had plagued their journey. This human was connected to them somehow, but how was that possible? The Silent Watchers are nothing more than cowards hiding behind encrypted messages, he said, trying to project the same confidence he had felt moments before. Your species will surrender immediately, or we will take your world by force. Those are your only options." "I'm afraid you're mistaken about our options, Commander," Captain Vasquez replied calmly. "You see, the Silent Watchers aren't hiding behind messages. They're hiding behind asteroids, moons, and the empty spaces between worlds. And they've been preparing for your arrival for a very long time." As she spoke, the tactical displays on the Nexari bridge began to change. The asteroid belt, which had shown only faint energy readings before, suddenly erupted with new contacts. Hundreds of them, each one representing a significant artificial structure hidden among the space rocks. But these weren't human constructions. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Nexari database, combining technologies from dozens of different species in ways that should have been impossible. "Impossible?" Kexvor whispered from his position at the tactical station. "The asteroids they're not asteroids at all. They're camouflaged installations, military installations." Zenth-Ka moved to the tactical display, his glowing eyes studying the new information with growing alarm. The structures were massive, each one easily the size of a Nexari battleship. They were positioned throughout the asteroid belt in a defensive formation that would have taken decades to construct and position properly. "You're beginning to understand," Captain Vasquez said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "The Silent Watchers aren't just monitoring your empire, Commander. They're the survivors of every world you've conquered, the refugees who escaped your victories, the witnesses to your atrocities." The main display shifted to show dozens of faces, each one belonging to a different species. Zenth-Ka recognized some of them: Calarians, Rexians, Tolmari, and others, species that the Empire had conquered, enslaved, or scattered, species that should have been broken and powerless. "Every conquest you've made has left survivors," Captain Vasquez continued. "People who escaped in the final moments before their worlds fell. People who carried with them the knowledge of their civilizations, their technologies, their cultures. And for the past century, they've been finding their way to Earth." Zenth-Ka's mind raced as he processed this information. The implications were staggering. If Earth had been harboring refugees from conquered worlds, if they had been sharing technology and knowledge, then the humans were not the primitive species the intelligence reports had described. They were something far more dangerous, a coalition of survivors united by a common enemy. Why Earth? He asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Because humans have a peculiar trait that most species lack, Captain Vasquez explained. When someone asks us for help, we don't ask what we can gain from it. We ask what we can give. When the first refugees arrived at our world, scared and broken and carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs, we didn't see potential slaves or resources to exploit. We saw people who needed help. The tactical display continued to update, showing more and more hidden installations throughout the solar system. The moons of Jupiter revealed themselves to be massive weapons platforms, their surfaces, carefully camouflaged to look like natural celestial bodies. Saturn's rings contain hundreds of automated defense drones, powered down but ready to activate at a moment's notice. Even the planet Mars showed signs of underground facilities that extended deep into the planet's core. 137 years ago, Captain Vasquez continued, the first Calarian refugee ship arrived at Earth. They were the survivors of your conquest of the Calarian home system. They taught us about your empire, your methods, your weaknesses. They also taught us about faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and shield technology. Zentka felt his confidence crumbling as the true scope of the situation became clear. The Nexari Empire had been operating under the assumption that Earth was an isolated, primitive world. In reality, it had become the center of a vast network of survivors, refugees, and resistance fighters from across the galaxy. 53 years ago, the captain continued, the Vrexian survivors arrived. They brought with them knowledge of advanced computer systems, artificial intelligence, and cybernetic warfare. 27 years ago, the Tolmari refugees shared their expertise in stealth technology and sensor jamming. Each group that arrived brought new knowledge, new perspectives, and new reasons to ensure that your empire would never again destroy an innocent world. The bridge crew of the Eternal Dominion watched in stunned silence as the full extent of Earth's defenses revealed themselves. What had appeared to be a primitive world was actually the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, protected by a combination of technologies that no single species had ever achieved. The Silent Watchers have been watching you for decades, Captain Vasquez said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Every world you've conquered, every life you've destroyed, every family you've torn apart. They've been documenting your crimes, studying your methods, and preparing for the day when you would finally come for Earth. Zentka straightened to his full height, his military training reasserting itself despite the overwhelming evidence of his fleet's peril. Even if what you say is true, you are still facing 500 of the Empire's finest warships. Your installations may be impressive, but they cannot stand against the combined might of the Nexari fleet. You're right, Captain Vasquez agreed. They can't stand against your fleet. They can do something far more effective. They can teach your fleet a better way to exist. Before Zentka could ask what she meant, the asteroid installations began move. But instead of opening fire with devastating weapons, they deployed something entirely different. Streams of microscopic devices, too small to be targeted by conventional weapons, began spreading throughout the Nexari fleet. They passed through the ship's shields as if they didn't exist, attaching themselves to hull plating and communication arrays. What are you doing to my ships? Zentka demanded. We're sharing information, Captain Vasquez replied. Those nanoscale devices contain the personal stories of every refugee who has found sanctuary on Earth. The history of every world your empire has conquered. The testimonies of every survivor who has made it to our world. Your crew is about to learn the truth about what the Nexari Empire has done to the galaxy. Throughout the fleet, communication systems began activating without authorization. Screens throughout the ships displayed images and videos that the crew had never seen before. They showed the Calarian homeworld before the conquest, its cities full of art and music and life. They showed Vrexian families torn apart by the Empire's slave raids. They showed the beauty and culture of dozens of worlds that had been reduced to smoking ruins in the name of Nexary expansion. Sir, Fexenai called out, his voice shaking. The crew is asking questions. They want to know why we're here. They want to know if there's another way. Zenth-Ka realized with growing horror that the nanoscale devices weren't just sharing information. They were creating empathy, forcing his warriors to see their enemies as people rather than obstacles to conquest. It was a form of warfare that the Empire had never encountered before, and against which they had no defense. This is what the Silent Watchers have been preparing for, Captain Vasquez said, her voice now carrying a note of sadness. Not a battle, but an awakening. Your empire has existed for centuries by convincing its people that conquest is the only path to survival. We're here to show them that there's another way. The trap was not made of metal and energy. It was made of truth and compassion, and it was far more effective than any weapon the Nexary had ever faced. When predators become prey, the transformation began slowly, like dawn breaking over a dark world. Throughout the Nexary fleet, crew members who had never questioned their empire's methods were suddenly confronted with the faces and voices of those they had conquered. The nanoscale devices continued their work, sharing not just information, but emotional connections that transcended species barriers. The Zenth-Ka watched in growing alarm as his bridge crew's expressions changed from confusion to understanding to something he had never seen before in Nexary eyes: remorse. Subcommander Fexenai was staring at a display showing Calarian children playing in a park that no longer existed, destroyed in the Empire's conquest of their world. Tactical Officer Kexvor had tears streaming down his scaled face as he watched a Vrexian mother's testimony about losing her family to Nexary slave raiders. Turn off those displays, Zenth-Ka ordered, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. All crew members are to ignore these transmissions and return to their duties immediately. But his orders fell on deaf ears. The crew members were too absorbed in the stories they were witnessing, too moved by the testimonies they were hearing. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing the Empire's conquests from the perspective of the conquered, and the experience was transforming them. It won't work, Commander, Captain Vasquez said, her voice now carrying a note of gentle understanding. You can't unsee truth once it's been revealed. You can't unfeel compassion once it's been awakened. Your crew is discovering what we learned long ago, that there is strength in diversity, power in cooperation, and hope in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. On the main display, the tactical situation continued to evolve. The hidden installations throughout the solar system were now fully revealed, their weapons systems powered up and ready. But instead of the overwhelming barrage of destruction that Zenth-Ka expected, they held their fire. The Earth Defense Network was demonstrating a level of restraint that was completely alien to Nexary military doctrine. Why aren't you attacking? Zenth-Ka demanded. You have us surrounded, outgunned, and outnumbered. Why aren't you destroying my fleet? Captain Vasquez's expression grew sad. Because destruction was never our goal, Commander. We didn't build this defense network to destroy the Nexary Empire. We built it to save the galaxy from the Empire's destructive path, including saving the Empire from itself. The concept was so foreign to Zenth-Ka's understanding that he struggled to process it. The Nexary way of war was simple, overwhelming force applied without mercy until the enemy was completely destroyed. The idea of showing restraint when holding a position of strength was not just unfamiliar, it was incomprehensible. You speak of saving the Empire, he said, his voice heavy with skepticism. But you harbor its enemies. You protect those who would see it destroyed. We protect those who would see it changed, Captain Vasquez corrected. Commander, look at your crew. Look at what they're discovering. They're not learning to hate the Empire. They're learning to question whether there might be a better way to use its power. It was true. Throughout the bridge, Zenth-Ka could see his officers engaging in quiet conversations about what they were witnessing. They weren't expressing hatred for the Empire, but rather confusion about its methods. They were asking questions that no Nexary had ever asked before. What if there was another way? What if strength could be used to protect rather than conquer? What if the Empire's vast resources were directed toward building rather than destroying? Sir, Fexenai said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The Calarian survivors in the transmission, they're not asking for revenge. They're asking for the killing to stop. They're asking for their children to grow up in a galaxy where they don't have to fear the Empire's return. Zenth-Ka wanted to dismiss his subordinate's words, to order him to focus on military objectives rather than emotional appeals. But the truth was that he was struggling with the same questions. The nanoscale devices were affecting him too, forcing him to confront the reality of what the Empire had done to countless worlds. "The choice is yours, Commander," Captain Vasquez said, her voice cutting through his internal struggle. "You can continue on the path your Empire has always followed. You can try to fight your way out of this system, though I should warn you that you would not survive the attempt. Or you can choose to be part of something better. What are you proposing?" Zenth-Ka asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Join us," she said simply. "The Earth Defense Network isn't just a military alliance. It's a coalition of species working together to build a better galaxy. We have Calarian engineers designing new technologies for healing rather than harming. We have Vrexian computer specialists creating communication networks that connect worlds in friendship rather than conquest. We have Tolmari scientists developing ways to restore damaged ecosystems on worlds that were scarred by war." The main display shifted to show images of Earth itself, but not the primitive world that Zenth-Ka had expected to find. Instead, he saw a vibrant, thriving planet where humans worked alongside dozens of other species. He saw cities that blended architectural styles from across the galaxy, research facilities where former enemies collaborated on projects that benefited everyone, and spaceports where ships from countless worlds arrived not as conquerors, but as partners. "This is what we've built together," Captain Vasquez continued. "Not an empire based on fear and domination, but a commonwealth based on mutual respect and cooperation. Every species that joins us contributes their unique strengths to the whole, and everyone benefits from the combined knowledge and resources of all." Zenth-Ka found himself staring at the images with growing wonder. The concept was so alien to everything he had been taught about galactic civilization that it seemed almost impossible. Yet, the evidence was right in front of him. Earth hadn't just survived contact with dozens of refugee species, it had thrived because of it. "What about the Empire?" he asked. "What happens to the Nexary homeworld, to the billions of citizens who depend on the Empire's resources?" "They would be welcome too," Captain Vasquez replied. "We're not asking the Empire to disappear, Commander. We're asking it to evolve, to use its vast resources and organizational capabilities to build rather than destroy, to become a force for stability and growth rather than conquest and oppression." The bridge crew was listening intently now, their attention focused on the conversation rather than their duties. Zenth-Ka realized that they were waiting for his decision, but more than that, they were hoping for a particular choice. The nanoscale devices had done their work well, opening minds that had been closed by centuries of imperial propaganda. "Sir," Kexvor said quietly, "the tactical analysis shows that Captain Vasquez is correct. We cannot win a battle in this system. But more than that, I'm not sure we should try. What if there really is another way?" Zenth-Ka looked around his bridge, seeing his crew with new eyes. These were soldiers who had followed him through dozens of campaigns, who had never questioned the Empire's methods or its goals. Yet now they were asking questions that went to the heart of what the Empire represented. They were wondering if there might be something better than endless conquest. "The choice is yours," Captain Vasquez repeated, "but choose quickly. The information your crew has received is being transmitted throughout Nexary space. Other fleets are learning the same truths, asking the same questions. Change is coming to the Empire whether you lead it or not." Zenth-Ka closed his glowing eyes and thought about the life he had lived. Centuries of conquest, of reducing proud civilizations to smoking ruins, of turning living worlds into resource extraction sites. He had told himself it was necessary, that it was the natural order of things. But now, confronted with the faces of those he had conquered, he could no longer avoid the truth. It had been wrong. All of it. When he opened his eyes, it was with the weight of transformation. "All ships," he said, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network. "Stand down weapons. Prepare to receive boarding parties. We need to learn about this commonwealth they've built." The response from his fleet was immediate and overwhelming. Ship after ship acknowledged the order, their crews expressing relief rather than defeat. They had been waiting for someone to give them permission to stop fighting, to start building something better. Captain Vasquez smiled, and this time it was warm and welcoming. "Welcome to the Earth Defense Network, Commander. There's a lot of work to be done, but we'll do it together." Months later, Zenth Ka stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that had become the headquarters of the Nexary Integration Council. He now wore the insignia of the Earth Defense Network alongside his original. Nexary rank markings, a symbol of the transformation that had swept through the galaxy. The process of converting the Empire from a force of conquest to a force of cooperation had been challenging, but it was succeeding beyond anyone's wildest expectations. "The Whisper Network warned us," he said to Captain Vasquez, who had become his closest advisor in the integration process. "Why did you give us that chance to choose?" Vasquez looked out at the stars, where ships from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old empire. "Because everyone deserves a chance to choose a better path," she replied. "Even empires, even enemies, even those who seem beyond redemption." Through the viewport, they could see the construction of the next phase of the Commonwealth's expansion. Not through conquest, but through invitation. Not through fear, but through hope. The Silent Watchers had completed their greatest mission. They had turned the galaxy's most feared predators into its most dedicated protectors. The trap had been sprung not with weapons or violence, but with truth and compassion. And in the end, that had made all the difference in the galaxy.